Well, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's TV review of the Apple TV Plus original series, Smoke Season 1. This will follow Episode 6, which is called Manhood, and is once again directed by McKay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen out there in the Smokeverse, this was quite the episode. It was very over the top, it was very campy and silly, and it is an episode that is dealing with a lot of you have to leap to logic in a lot of the parts of this episode, but it is quite the episode. It's an episode where characters played by Greg Kinnear finally realize what's going on, where Freddie comes to basically his kind of wits end, and it basically is the turning point for this series because it is really fascinating now that pretty much the whole entire arsonist crew know that Dave is an arsonist, but Dave is searching for Freddie now that he knows that the arsonist murdered the HR manager, the one that turned him down, that turned Freddie down. He goes in and he finds out that the basically Freddie worked for Coops, and just basically starts lining up. It's exactly what would happen if an arsonist takes too long or a murder takes like too long, and they keep going. They're eventually gonna get caught. The kind of things are gonna come out of the woodwork, similar to Dave's story, but he doesn't know it yet. And yeah, this is basically the kind of concluding arc for Freddie. There's going to be more with him, but it's going to be more of Dave's story from the here on out, which it kind of has been for a while now. But this is kind of like the end of Freddie's concurrent story in the aspect that Freddie was going to murder the lady that kind of turned him down, and he is thwarted at the last minute, which is very TV/movie-esque. There's a lot of stuff going on in this episode. We, of course, have Ezra having a confrontation with Harvey, the Greg Kinnear character. This is when, of course, Michelle walks in, and basically Ezra is like, there's the signs are there. I know what he's capable of. Think about it. Think of all the things he's doing. And the stages of grief that, of course, Harvey's character goes through in this episode is quite funny and quite sad. But, of course, the blackmailing of Harvey by Michelle and Ezra puts Harvey in a predicament where he has to follow suit and follow into the investigation, which brings in a detective played by Chlumsky, and she is not very well used in this episode, to be fairly honest. I was kind of disappointed by the fact that, she's just there as a atypical detective and doesn't really have any purpose outside of just being kind of more authentic to the story. She has agents on her side that can help her out, but they have to get the evidence. They have to pinpoint exactly why they think Dave is the culprit. They listen to a lot of his audiobook, which coincides with like the fire investigations that he has been involved with. Very much like if I were to talk about the place I worked with, I could put it as stories in my book or whatever, because that's stuff you've experienced. Similar, like if Freddie were to write a book about a cook or whatever that was at his wit's end and started causing like damage and stuff like that. So there's not real much evidence. They don't find with the cigarette thing. They don't really find much DNA on it. They don't really find anything. But there has to be kind of a point where Dave, unless they're going to keep going with Dave's storyline, they're going to keep going and going and going. There has to be a point where the twist, the turn, the kind of crash down the mountain happens that this series has been kind of leading towards. And that happens when there is a story piece that Dave talks about in his audiobook where he talks about a kid wanting pistachio ice cream, but the kid missays how pistachio is. I think he says pistachio or whatever it is. And Harvey stops and re-listens to it and realizes that they are on to something, that Dave could not have known that, even though he's been around all the fires that have been consumed. And why is he always there? You see it when they look back at the footage right before his crash. Harvey comes to the realization that Dave would not know that unless he was there before the fire happened, and it basically causes him to have the different stages of grief. He talks to, I think he's either wife or daughter, and he comes to the realization that Dave is the arsonist, which everybody knew, was kind of trying to tell him, but he refused to believe it because Dave is his friend. He sees a picture of it, which he breaks with his hand, and you would be the same way too if you had a friend who you were friends with for years and who you felt like you could rely on ends up being the one you're looking for, the most dangerous culprit, one of the two arsonists, and it would break you in a lot of aspects because you have been, you've been kind of concealing the fact that you probably knew forever that Dave is very suspicious in what he's doing. And it really is heartbreaking to watch Greg Kinnear's character, Harvey, just kind of realize what's happening. And on top of everything, Dave is out there searching for the other arsonist, is lying to them why he, instead of taking his day off, he's going out there. So because Dave is good at knowing what an arsonist thinks, he's good at being an arsonist investigator, he's able to track down through various means by going into Freddie's apartment and going into his job and his HR department and stuff like that. And I love the sadness of how Freddie's character is kind of revealed about what happened to him and the nature of the system and stuff like that, because the HR department, when Freddie talks to him and when he talks to the boss that works at Coops, the ones that is just recently been hired, there is a level of like contempt for Freddie because Freddie is different, because he is reserved. He's an individual that just doesn't really talk to anybody. So therefore, why would they want him? It's one of those things where it's like really depressing stuff, to be fairly honest, when you look at like what you end up finding about Freddie's character, about how many different homes in the foster care system he was in, how many different times he moved around, how when he became 19 he was basically told he had to leave, he was given a check. There's a lot of things there where you realize that Freddie has been rejected so many times that has caused him to basically collapse and like snap in a lot of respects, and that's why he does the way he does. Of course, the last foster home was on fire and burned to the ground. It doesn't excuse him for what he's doing, because there clearly is some mentality and mental issues there, but it shows that if a person is pushed in a certain direction, it could be white, black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever it is, if you're pushed in a certain direction, you will eventually collapse and you'll eventually snap into a world that can be very dangerous. And that's what Freddie's character is basically heading towards when he talks to his friend, the other guy that works at Coops, who realizes that Freddie is the arsonist because of the murder of the HR manager. I see why the character, the friend, is scared, because the way Freddie acts and the way Freddie talks and the way Freddie thinks, I think he thinks he's going to be killed. But basically, Freddie takes his phone and his keys. It's really kind of weird writing, to be fairly honest. But you know that Freddie he's basically letting his friend go, but he's not letting his friend get off easy, because he feels like his friend doesn't really care about him, just like the rest of the people. Or maybe he does, and I don't know. Something, let me know in the comments what you think about the friend's role in this episode. But basically, it all leads to, of course, Dave going to Freddie's apartment and discovering that he is disturbed. I think Dave really realizes that Freddie is similar to him in a lot of respects. They're very disturbed individuals with very lonely personas. And Dave goes through this episode. He wakes up and basically his wife leaves him, which I kind of question with the way the camera, the way the lighting and the mood of the shots and the way they're set up. If Dave's like imagining this and stuff like that, because there are several scenes where like he'll look at himself in the mirror and he sees an uglier version of himself, and then like he acts like one of those like TV detectives, and it really is just like his persona in his mind. And when he talks to the doctor to get information about the fires that Freddie has been sending, he beats up the doctor, but he ends up just paying him because it's in his mind. And it's basically like his persona. He has to be forceful and domineering, and like, you know, one of those like Chips or Dukes of Hazzard detectives or whatever. And it's really not till the end that we realize why he's been imagining this stuff, but he's been, you know, he's really hurt and stuff like that. And at first, when you see him when he looks in the mirror and he sees like an uglier version of himself, it made me wonder if that's like his actual look. But I think it's more of like because of what his wife, who's going to be apparently his ex-wife, says to him, because it's not really fully 100% explained by her, but I think she knows that he was cheating on her. Maybe the ex-wife called the wife or whatever. I don't entirely know. But it's when he curses at her, get the F out, it really is telling. And it just is a lot of stuff in his mind that is slowly eeping out into his eventual conclusion at the end of the episode, where he has a gigantic erection when he uses the fire extinguisher when he stops Freddie from killing Brenda by setting her and him on fire, which was a really almost tragic end to Freddie and Brenda, because Freddie starts talking to Brenda like his old foster care parent, And he starts to explain about how he's been rejected and how he went to a movie once and everybody was laughing at it, and why is everybody laughing at it. And there is just a lot there and a lot of sadness to Freddie's character, but it doesn't excuse him for what he's doing. I don't think that's what Dennis Lehane, who's the writer of this episode, is trying to say. It's just the nature of like how people are thrown away in society and how that becomes a sticking point for a lot of people. I mean, it's a sticking point for the way the world is right now, where people feel like they're left behind and they're throwing all their weight into some really sad things. But once again, it's also, you can also go to the Michelle stuff when her brother shows up and says their mother is being released, and how Michelle breaks down, starts crying and like beating against the wall, the house and stuff like that. The idea of torment and the idea of abuse and the idea of rejection and the idea of all these stuffs that it puts into your mind and puts into your brain and how it affects you and damages you. It just, there's a lot of stuff there. You can see it through Michelle's character with her mother. You can see it with Dave and his just kind of domineering aspects. You can see it with Freddie and his rejections. There's a lot of stuff there that affects you mentally and emotionally, and it's just how do you handle it and how do you look at yourself, you know, when Freddie's talking to his friend in the park and like how he remembers the one day he was there. There's just a lot of stuff where happiness is swallowed up in darkness, and I think that's a lot of like what fire does. It consumes you and takes away it takes away from you and destroys you and, you know, puts you into a very hard predicament. And that's what this show is doing, smoke and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a really difficult episode. It's a really hard to watch episode. It's, once again, my major issue with this episode is just the fact that it happens to end in a really abruptly manner when it comes to just how easily resolved Freddie's storyline is. And I'm not saying that we need to see Brenda die. We don't need to see Brenda die, but it's just the fact that Dave shows up at the last minute. He sees the fire extinguisher, which is convenient that the fire extinguisher is just right there. You know, of course, he drops the mag of his gun to, you know, distract Freddie, and he's able to, you know, spray Freddie with the fire extinguisher foam before Freddie can hit the lighter to burn both of them alive. And yeah, it's really convenient plotting. The idea of like, now Michelle's mom is getting out of prison, and the fact that now everything is coming together with the idea of like, they know Dave's the arsonist, and Harvey, you know, now knows. It is your atypical, we're getting close to the end of the season. We only have 3 more episodes, and it kind of is starting to wrap up. So the chess pieces are starting to finally fall in place, and that's what this episode is doing. That is what Manhood is about the kind of beginning of the end of this season. And it's a good episode. It's not as good as last week's episode, I don't think. I think last week's episode was way stronger, but I think it definitely harps into the dichotomy of humans, who we are, what our brain can do if we're put into really tragic situations, and what happens when the revelations happen that we refuse to believe until it's fully in our face. And yeah, it's really interesting stuff. So I to kind of conclude, I really enjoyed this episode. I think it's a really good, strong episode. Not as good as last week's episode, but I think it's still, like, if I were to score like an 8.5 out of 10, I think it really has some interesting stuff. It just does it a little too easily and too wrapped up too quickly. So overall, that is my take on the 6th episode of Smoke, which of course is called Manhood. So there you go. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. In the comments below, what do you think overall of this episode? What do you think overall of what it's doing? Where do you think it's headed next? Like, do you think we're just basically focused on Dave now? Let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace out, guys.